Hey guys, Fallen Messiah here, and boy do I have something special for you today. This is unlike any build guide I've ever done before, and perhaps even one you ever seen before. But first, let's rewind a little bit. When the PTR dropped and they announced the season theme with Chaos Uniques, I immediately decided on the spot on the builds that I was going to make and try out. Some of them because it just made the most sense. Like for example the Chaos perk for Druid's companions that made them into core skills. That seemed really powerful, and I always wanted to try the companion Druid, so this just made a lot of sense to me. Others, like Frenzy Barb, just because it's one of my favorite skills and I wanted to take full advantage of the new improvements. And then there's this. Spiritborn Devourer. One of the dumbest, weakest, useless skills in the entire game. So why Devourer out of all things, you might ask? Because when the Spiritborn was first introduced and announced, this was always one of the most standout skills to me in the entire game. Who doesn't like the concept of a giant poison centipede that follows you around and kills enemies for you? That's fucking cool, right? The only problem, of course, is that the skill itself is complete trash. It has always been trash, and I will go into skills' inherent problems a little bit further down the video, but unfortunately, it's always been bad, and to my knowledge, there has never been any real build featuring it in any serious way. Until now. So, I decided that I was going to challenge myself. Unlike some other builds where, at the very least, I had some frame of reference, Devourer builds simply do not exist. I looked in Maxroll, Mobalytics, you name it. Not just big streamer creators either. There's not a single community-made Devourer build to my knowledge, and so I had to make everything from scratch myself. And while I ultimately am pleased with the result, a build that can wreck Torment 4 and push into PTR's 80+, getting there was no easy task. You see, I was going to use the brand new Chaos Unique system to put the weapon Boucher Nakpa onto the paint slot, and then this would give my Devourer a potency tag. This in turn could have been used with something like Sunstained War Crozier for more potency damage, and something like Potent Exchange for even more damage on their potency skills. And bam, big damage, right? Well, unfortunately, I immediately faced my very first hurdle because Vushne Nakba item just simply doesn't work in the current PTR as a Chaos Unique. It never gave the potency tag to our Devourer skills. It will only do so if I use it as a standard weapon, which unfortunately resulted in a very severe damage loss, so I had to scrap this entire idea entirely and start from scratch once again. So again, this took a lot of time. But ultimately, I'm really happy with the way things turned out, and I cannot wait to show you guys what I managed to cook up. So if you like these kind of videos, these kind of build guides, and if you appreciate my out-of-the-box thinking, and you like seeing new things, you like seeing something you haven't seen before, something fresh in this game, then I would appreciate it if you would drop a like to the video and sub to the channel, because this took a long time to make and I really appreciate it. It also tells me that you like what I'm doing and it motivates me to do more. But anyway, let's get straight into the build guide itself. Now, as always, I'm gonna go over first the skill portion of the build, but before that, I would just like to take a couple of moments just to talk a little bit more about this class and kind of the challenges and hurdles that I had when it comes to assembling Devourer and anything as far as Spiritborn is concerned. Main problem with Spiritborn as a class is that it's a jack of all trades, master of none. It has all these things that work well for them, but it doesn't excel at any one thing. Another major problem with Spiritborn is just how conditional Spiritborn bonuses actually are, which in my opinion prevents it from being really the top competitive class in the game right now. And I'm not counting the outlier builds like the Balazan, but more as a whole, the Spiritborn after Season 6 struggled severely, and I believe it's due to these couple of reasons. It's always if X happens, then Z, then Y. And I feel this is especially pronounced in two very important things: key passives and legendary Paragon nodes. Let me show you what I mean. So for example, Vital Strikes, we deal 80% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, but then once we hit them, they're no longer vulnerable, so you have to keep applying that. Or what about this? The base period cost of a skill grants something, and then if you swap to the other core skill, you get 75 core stats and you get extra something. Or how about this? every third cast of the same basic skill increases all skill ranks by 4, which is pretty useless as a key passive. What is that gonna do for me? And then finally there's Noxious Resistance that should speak to poison skills, but in fact it's just not good enough. So one of the biggest hurdles I faced when assembling this build is what kind of key passive do I want to play around with, because none of them are really good. And when you look at the Paragon bonuses, they're even worse. For example, why does Convergence only go up to 30% multiplicative damage when most classes have Paragon nodes that provide them well above 50, 60, 70 plus multiplicative damage? Or for example this one, we deal only 15% extra damage, but it's doubled against crowd control enemies. But of course Unstoppable still exists, so there's a point in time where your enemies are no longer able to be crowd controlled. Or especially this, after we heal for 100% of our maximum life, then we do something to close enemies and then they take extra damage for 6 seconds. You see where I'm going with this. Things are far too conditional for my liking, and I believe this is ultimately the biggest hurdle that this class faces, and I would like these Paragon nodes especially to be a little bit more redesigned. But that's a rant for another time. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of all the things I had to contend with when assembling this build. The key passives especially, and the Paragon legendary nodes are just not up to snuff when you compare them to the other classes in the game. But with that in mind, here is the final setup. So we're going to be using Withering Fist, Enhanced, and Accelerated. So we need a reliable way to proc Vulnerable, and Withering Fist is great because it's a basic skill, so it's always available, but also it does two other things. Number one, it has crowd control, which is important for us, for Paragon nodes and glyphs and more damage. And number two, it has this debuff where enemies poisoned by Withering Fist deal less damage. This build is really frail, so any source of damage reduction that we have, we are going to embrace, so that's why this goes pretty well with the build. We're also using a core skill, Crushing Hand, Enhanced, and Advantageous. Of course, this is still not our damage dealer, this is just a supplementary skill. We need a Spirit Spender to proc Lucians and to proc Ring of Starless Skies, so Crushing Hand is going to be that main Spirit Spender. Additionally, it also grants us more barrier and also another debuff and crowd control in terms of knockdown. So overall, it just goes really well with our build. 1 point Vortex, Enhanced, and Replenishing. Devourer deals large amounts of damage in a fairly small concentrated radius, so if you can group monsters together with Vortex, you're going to increase your damage substantially. Also, whenever we cast Vortex, if we cast Devourer right after it, we can actually increase its damage significantly. It's not always easy to pull off, but it is manageable. And also Replenishing just allows us to have Vortex almost on demand, so just overall a really great synergy with this build. We're going to put 1 point into Mirage, just so we can progress 3 points into Unrestrained Power. We are always unstoppable thanks to our Spirit Hole, but more on that later. We can also put 1 point into Focal Point and 3 points into Apex. Apex is an amazing passive for us. We deal 27% increased vulnerable damage, but this is doubled against elite opponents, which are the only ones who really matter for us. So you can read this as 54% extra multiplicative damage on bosses and elites, which is just amazing. A couple of points into Armored Hide, I put 2. If you can spare more, it's always good because then the duration lasts longer. And I also put 1 point into Enhanced Armor Hide. So whenever we activate Armor Hide, it grants maximum resolve. Whenever we have a stack of resolve, we have 30% damage reduction. That's really important. We always wish to have stacks to keep ourselves alive. Not only that, but when we activate Armor Hide, we also gain 100% block chance, which is really important for one of the legendary aspects that we're using, but I will talk about that in the item section. But we always want to hit this before we actually hit the Devourer if we can. We're going to put 1 point into Counterattack Enhancement, and Reinforced. So here's the deal. This passively increases our crit strike damage for every close enemy. We don't actually want to be close to our enemies. In the Chaos perk portion, there is one perk that grants us bonuses if we're away from our opponents. However, I still find that this overall does tend to increase our damage, especially if you screw up and you don't get the proc of the perk, then this is going to help you at the very least. 1 point into Anti-Venom, and then we're gonna put 3 points into Nourishment. Whenever we heal, our poison damage is increased by 20%. We have different sources of healing. Whenever we unleash our Devourer, we're gonna heal. Whenever we attack, we're gonna heal pretty much. So we're always going to be benefiting from this poison damage bonus. 3 points Resilient for more life. and we're gonna have 3 points Dominant for more damage, 3 points Brilliance, and 3 points Acceleration for increased damage as well. 3 points Ravenous, 3 points Oppressive. Then we're gonna put 3 points into Resolution. When we cast an ultimate, we gain increased damage. Now we're not gonna have this bonus all of the time, so you actually can take off a couple of points here and put them somewhere else if you really wish to, but it's still a good bonus to have. 1 point Spiritual Attunement, so that we can progress into Supremacy. Supremacy is absolutely amazing. When we kill enemies, we gain these stacks, we gain a ton of damage, so you want to put all of your points here as well. Then we're gonna put 1 point into Sustenance, and this is also what enables us to heal. This is one of the different sources of healing as well. So when we hit enemies with ultimate, we heal for X amount of life. And then 3 points into Intricacy. This is going to allow us to cast our defensive and focus skills. After we cast our Devourer, we're gonna have a couple of free skill casts in the next 7 seconds. So that's also very important as well. We're gonna put 5 points into the Devourer. This is of course our big centipede, the main source and the only source of our damage, the big Mama Jama. We're gonna put 1 point into Harmonious and Exalted. The Devourer is quite a unique skill with some quite interesting and quirky mechanics. I will explain a little bit further how this actually plays in the gameplay portion of the video, but suffice it to say, Devourer doesn't make it easy for you at all. AI is a challenge. And also we're gonna go with Vital Strikes. As I explained earlier, we deal 80% multiplicative damage to vulnerable. This is going to remove the vulnerable effect when it procced, so we always have to be attacking our opponent and reapply vulnerable, and our Eagle Spirit Hole is going to do that for us. Okay, now let's talk about items. This build has been through so many iterations. Ultimately, this is what I ended up on. Now, as explained earlier in the intro of the video, this is not actually an ideal setup, but the game forced me to maneuver around a certain bug. I was going to put one weapon into a Chaos Unique slot, but the game just didn't give me the bonus, or in other words, the Devourer didn't get the potency tag. It only gained the tag when I put that weapon in the weapon slot, which is just not acceptable for this build because we do lose a ton of damage when we do that. So before I begin with the items, a couple of stats I feel you need to hit. You should always aim to have as close to 100 crit chance as possible. As you can see, we do achieve that. Also, armor cap is going to be very easy to achieve, which I will talk about in a second, and of course as close to a res cap as possible. One other thing, your Devourer lasts for 15 seconds. So as long as your cooldown is roughly around that, so you can always recast your skill, you're gonna be just fine. So as long as your Devourer is not like 20 plus seconds, you're good. It doesn't have to be 10, doesn't have to be 11 because it has this duration. I just want to say that this build needs every help that it can get. I'm not going to even bother with non-mythic version of this setup because we can barely crack tier 80 as it is. So usually on the live version of the game, I always make a non-mythic variant. In this case, no, I'm not even going to bother. So what you see is what you get. First is going to be Air of Perdition. Just a pretty amazing item for us. 60% multiplicative damage, crit strike chance as well. You should try to masterwork that 3 times if you can. It's going to make sure that we have 100% crit strike chance cap. And also movement speed, pretty nice to have. Lucky hit chance, honestly not super useful for us. And core skills is absolutely useless. On the chest, of course, it's going to be Shroud of False Death, because what else? +1 to all passives is really powerful, especially for Spiritborn, who has so many of these passives that multiply his damage. And also you want to make sure you triple crit all stats if you can. If one crit lands on max life, that's fine. Try not to crit the other 2 affixes because they're useless for it. On the gloves, we're going with Harmony of Ebewaka. This is great because we can move this pretty amazing item from the helm into a different item slot. So this says that according to our secondary Spirit Hole choice, our skills are all additionally Jaguar, Eagle, Gorilla, or Centipede, and also our skills deal almost 50% increased damage per spirit type they have. Our Centipede, our Devourer, is going to have 3 skill tags thanks to this interaction. This is 150% multiplicative damage, which is just insane. Next to our weapon, this is probably the biggest scaler of our entire damage here. For stats, you want to try to triple crit all stats. Damage reduction is also fine as well. For the pants, we're going with Band of First Breath. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this item, but I just found that anything else works just a little bit worse. Affixes are actually really great. Max life is amazing, crit strike chance is good, maximum resolve stacks, ideally you wanna at least put a couple of crit tempers here because they're really helpful. And then the effect says that when we cast Evade, we consume 1 stack of Resolve to increase our damage up to 48%. So in the gameplay loop, you will see that just before I cast Devourer, I disengage from the combat by evading, and then I cast Devourer to gain that extra buff. So this is going to make sure that we have even more damage and that our Devourer packs even greater punch. For the boots, we're going with Crown Evolution. This is one of 2 reasons we actually use core skills to have a resource spender. Ideally, you want a triple crit cooldown reduction, but double crit is also fine. But what this does is every time we use a skill with a resource cost, we gain 18% increased damage for 4 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So this is almost 100% extra multiplicative damage, which is just insane. All you have to do is cast your core skill, your Crushing Hand, 5 times. And you will also see, because of all the bonuses that we have, this resource penalty, you'll even feel it. And this resource penalty is additionally mitigated by our Ring of Starless Skies, that also rewards us with more damage when we spend resource, but it actually decreases the resource cost. So it kind of helps to mitigate this penalty to begin with. And these 2 items just work really well together. And then for the weapon itself, you really want to have Polearm here for the biggest base damage, and 0.9 attacks per second is what you want. For stats, we're going with Dexterity, Max Life, and third stat can be Crit Strike damage or Vulnerable damage. For tempers, you want to make sure you triple crit chance for the Devourer to deal double damage. This is just a straight up damage multi. The second temper can be vulnerable damage or crit strike damage. Now for the aspect, we're going with Apogee Furor. This is probably the best in-slot aspect for any ultimate skill. Whenever we cast an ultimate, we gain 20x more damage. It goes all the way up to 200%, so definitely put that on this slot. Now for the amulet. We are going with Dexterity, Percentage Armor, and the third one can be a offensive passive of your choice, but I went with Apex. It's the best one out of the all that we have on this build. We are aggressively stacking armor on this build because of this aspect. Casting a Gorilla skill increases our weapon damage by 45% of our armor for 3 seconds, up to 1500 maximum. Now, if you know how this game works, then you know that everything you do, every single damage you deal, scales off of your weapon damage. So the fact that we have an aspect that can actually slap more damage onto the weapon damage means that everything else gets multiplied on top of that. So this is just a very powerful aspect, and we want to take full advantage of that. We do that by having this total armor affix on amulet. We're also rocking skulls on our jewelry, and we're also going to be using Song of the Mountain for even more armor. So we want to make sure we have this bonus capped out. By the way, when I use Song of the Mountain, you can see I have 3.6 thousand armor, so we are taking full advantage of this effect. For tempers, we're going with total armor for even more armor and the Devourer cooldown reduction. And for masterworking, try to crit armor once and try to crit Apex twice. Ring number 1 is going to be Dexterity, Max Life, and Crit Strike damage. If you don't have Max Crit, then instead of Life, you want to roll Crit Strike chance instead. For the tempers, Crit Strike damage and the Devourer cooldown reduction. For our aspect, we're going with Redirected Force. We gain increased Crit Strike damage equal to 70% of our block chance. And whenever we cast our Armored Hide, we gain 100% block chance. So this means that our Armored Hide grants us 70% increase on our critical strike damage for 3.3 seconds. Within that window, we really want to cast our Devourer. And this is also why it's a really good idea to put any extra points into Armored Hide, because then it actually increases the duration of this active effect. For tempering, you want to double crit Dexterity, and if you crit once or twice life, that's fine too. I decided to keep it as it is because this build kind of struggles with life, and we're also playing with half life. And the last item is going to be Ring of Starless Skies. As I explained earlier, just another huge source of damage multiplication. It also helps to mitigate the penalty we have due to our Crown Evolution. and it just has great stats overall, especially crit strike chance that you want to really masterwork until you have 100%. Let's talk about rune words now. So for rune word number 1, we're going with Igni Q. So this is going to store offering, and it is going to release it that whenever we cast a non-basic skill. And then once that happens, we're gonna invoke Druid's Earthen Bulwark. We scale damage off of our barrier thanks to the Viscous Shield Paragon node. So this barrier is going to help us in survivability and also just overall in terms of damage as well. Second one is going to be Seer Tool. You can put something else here if you want to. This is something that I found works the best for me. When we cast 5 skills, and that's going to happen all the time, we invoke Frost Nova. Frost Nova applies Freeze, which is other crowd control for more damage. It applies Vulnerable, which is something that we scale highly off of, and also monsters take more damage. So in my opinion, this is just an amazing rune word for this build setup. For other 2 armor slots, we're going of course with Dexterity Gems, and for Jewelry, you want to make sure we always benefit fully with unyielding hits. So if you have over 3000 armor, then you don't really need skulls, you can just put diamonds. But if you have less and you can't benefit fully from this effect, then you really should put skulls instead. Otherwise, sort out your resistances with diamonds. Let's talk about Chaos perks now, and we have some interesting things to talk about here. So we are going with a unique Chaos perk called a Beast Cornered. For every 10% life we are missing, we gain 20% increased damage and 5% increased damage reduction. We are pairing this well with Marred Guard that says that we can no longer be healed above 50 life. But it also grants us more bonuses such as max resistances, more armor, which we scale our damage off of, and more barrier and fortify. These 2 things make us tanky in a sense, but also quite frail to all sources of burst damage, like for example exploding effects on the ground. If you're pushing into the higher tiers of the pit, you really have to be careful about those, but for most content it's really not that much of an issue. For second one, we're going with Accelerating Chaos, just chance unlucky hit to reduce random cooldowns, which is pretty nice for us. And also the last perk is going to be Back Off. This is very important. When we cast a skill, it deals reduced damage to enemies that are close to us when we cast it, and 200% increased damage if we are not close. This is a very important part of our gameplay loop, because whenever we are grouping our monsters with Vortex, before we actually cast Devour, we want to evade out to get the buff of Band of First Breath, and then we want to cast Devour on top of the monsters. Whenever we cast Devourer on a location on our cursor, it's going to appear there. As long as we are not close to our enemies, Devourer can be close, that's completely fine. But as long as we are not close to these enemies are going to take 200% extra damage for our Devourer thanks to the Back Off Chaos perk. I will explain more in the gameplay portion. And for consumables, you want to make sure you use Elixir of Fortitude for more life, Queen Supreme for dexterity, Song of the Mountain for more armor, so that we always have 3000 armor to gain full effect of unyielding hits, and also we also want to make sure we have Soothing Spices for more resistances. And before jumping into Paragon, we just have to talk a little bit about Spirit Hole. So our main spirit is going to be Eagle, because whenever we cast an Eagle skill, we're going to shoot out these Storm Feathers and they apply Vulnerable. This is very important to us because our key passive deals tons of damage on Vulnerable, but then also it removes that effect. We have to keep reapplying it, and that's why we're using this as our main Spirit Hole. And our secondary one is going to be Gorilla for a couple of reasons. We do lose a little bit of damage for not choosing Jaguar, but trust me, you really want survivability on this build. So Gorilla is actually going to be a better option for a couple of reasons. First of all, we get more resolve, and then we're also always unstoppable, which is amazing for this build, trust me. But also, perhaps even more importantly, our unyielding hits says that whenever we cast a Gorilla skill, it increases our weapon damage tremendously. So by having all of our skills being Gorilla skills, we can actually benefit from this bonus 100% of the time. I played around using Jaguar instead, and then trying to time around Armor Hide, but I ended up having a miserable experience, so I find ultimately just that having this on 100% of the time is, in my opinion, a better solution. But of course, you're free to mix and match however you feel works better for you. Alright guys, it's Paragon o'clock time. I already ranted a little bit about Paragon nodes for Spiritborn, so you've already kind of seen what we're going with. But just to quickly go over all the nodes and glyphs on this build. We're starting off with Spirit. The scales are crit strike damage and also gives a ton of damage to the elites, which is always really nice for us. So we want to make sure we always benefit from both of these bonuses. For second node, we're going with Bitter Medicine. Bitter Medicine is less important here as a node itself, but other nodes, especially these healing received nodes, Rare and Magic, on this board are more important for us. And that's why we're going with this Paragon node. Because one thing I forgot to talk about, if you go to the Devourer, it says Devourer's damage is increased by 350% of our healing received bonus, up to 400%. You want to make sure you try and cap this off as much as you can because it's a huge source of multiplicative damage for the Devourer. We're currently here at 380, so we can push even further with this. And this Paragon board is an amazing source for these healing received apexes. Ordinarily, we would always skip them because they're fairly useless, but not on this build. On this build, they multiply our damage. So we will definitely be taking all of them, and as well a couple over here. By the way, don't worry, as always with all of my builds, there is a planner. You will see everything down below. So the Paragon nodes will be in the planner below the video and pinned in the comments as well. For number 2 glyph, we're going with Canny. Canny just increases our non-physical damage, which poison is. Third Paragon node, Convergence. This is just going to increase even more of our damage, and also this Paragon board helps to proc itself. We have a couple of these nodes, like for example Elementalist, that give you huge amounts of non-physical damage, and this also counts for Convergence. So you don't have to invest anything in items or anything like that, just follow along with this setup and it's going to proc itself. Glyph number 3 is going to be Fester. Our Centipede skills deal increased damage to crowd control enemies. This is why our Withering Fist basic skill is actually really important to apply this debuff, this crowd control, so that we benefit from a lot of this damage. Board number 4 is going to be Revealing. So up to 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies, and we always want to make sure they're always vulnerable because we have huge bonuses on our passives and key passive. And also we deal 15% increased damage, which is doubled against crowd control enemies. Glyph number 4 is going to be Headhunter for even more damage. And board number 5 is Viscous Shield. The OGs are going to remember Spiritborn in Season 6, how broken Viscous Shield was. We were stacking Barrier like crazy, and right now this is not nearly as strong, but it's still an extra source of damage for us. That's why we are rocking the Rune Words to give us more Barrier, and that's why we always want to have Barrier at all times to benefit from this legendary node. Final glyph is going to be Revenge. We have a couple of sources of thorns on this build, so whenever we're dealing thorns damage to an enemy, they also take more damage from us, and the second part also just increases damage, no questions asked. The last board also has these very interesting nodes if you can spare extra points, where you get more damage reduction while having a barrier. Every little source of damage reduction really helps, so if you can spare them, make sure you do take them. And guys, it's time for the final portion of any of my build guides, which is the gameplay itself. I tried to make this as fluid and less complicated as I possibly could. My original setups had you juggling a couple of buffs before casting the Devourer. I didn't like it. It was also not super effective. So the final setup I feel right now is the easiest and also perhaps even most powerful of them all. So whenever we encounter a group of mobs, ideally first we want to jump in, wither them with a fist. And then, look, I can just spam my Crushing Hand. Despite all the penalties, we're always full of Vigor, so even though our Crown Illusion gives us penalties, it's never actually something that we really have to concern ourselves with. And look, we have 5 stacks of Ring of Starless Skies and 5 stacks of Crown Illusion, so this is just really important. This multiplies our damage tremendously. Just a couple of hits of Withering Fist for debuffs and slow, and then just pummel them away with our Crushing Hand. We also want to make sure that we are grouping monsters together with Vortex. Also allows the next skill to have even more damage, but you don't have to really worry too much about that. Just play naturally and fluidly, and then you will activate this buff sometimes and sometimes you won't. That's fine. What is important, however, is the next setup. So, we walked in, we got all the buffs. What we're gonna do now is we're going to await away from the combat. This gives us our increased damage because of our Band of First Breath. So, we are pummeling away, getting the bonuses, we are evading away, we are casting Armored Hide, and then the Devourer. And then our Devourer has maximum damage. It is really important that we are away from the opponents that we're trying to hit with the Devourer, because then our Devourer benefits from 200% extra damage from back off Chaos perk. So once again, just hitting my core skill, we're grouping them together, and then away, Armored Hide, and bam. Now for even more optimization, you actually want, as you're awaiting, you want to cast Devourer on the location of your opponent. Why? Well, when you read the skill, it does several things, but the most important one is, as it emerges, Devourer launches 10 toxic globs. These globs are the biggest source of damage. So when you cast Devourer on top of your opponent, it's going to do most of the damage that way. And it's also the best way to actually control Devourer's damage, because it kind of has a mind of its own. It tends to wander off, it tends to fuck off, really, and just kind of do its own thing. Sometimes it attacks opponents, other times it doesn't. This is the best way to control the direct damage output of Devourer. So as it emerges, these 10 toxic globs do the brunt of the damage. Then the centipede is also going to blast enemies in line, but only occasionally, and spitting at others for even less damage. So by having our Devourer on the very top of what we're trying to kill, we're going to maximize our damage output. And that's where Vortex comes into play, because we get all the stacks, we group the monsters, we evade, Armor Hide, and Devour, and if you follow this sequence, you will give your Devourer the biggest fighting chance. Look how cool this spell is. My only complaint is that the AI is so bad, and this combination of the PTR bug, where I wasn't able to assemble the build the way that I wanted it to, and the combination of poor AI, which I will show you a bit later in my pit clear, and the combination of pretty lackluster key passives and legendary Paragon nodes, all of that combined together to kind of make my life a lot more difficult assembling this than it had to be. And by the way, just to demonstrate that this really is bugged on the PTR. So as you can see, with this weapon here, my centipede has the potency tag on it. However, if I go the other way around and do what I originally intended and use this weapon on pants, for example, you can see that the potency tag is gone. So this is a huge buff that prevented me from assembling this build that way that I actually wanted it to. And don't worry, I tried all the other slots, I tried gloves, I tried boots, but it just didn't matter. It's still unfortunately bugged. So just a little side note here. And now I'm gonna also just show you a quick clear of my pit 80, just so you can see how this actually all works in practice. And here we are, guys. And if you're thinking like, oh, pit 80, well, that's so low. You haven't played this. I promise you, this took me so long. I wanted to get this clear so hard. Like, don't get me wrong, this build melts Storm 4. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to say it's the best speed farmer in the game. It's far from it. But it does an adequate job. Storm 4, you can do everything. You can do asteroid, you can farm bosses. So it's just a nice, fun alternative to your usual builds. If you like something new, something fresh, then this is going to appeal to you. This is visually so good. Unfortunately, there is a couple of moving parts and issues. As I already explained, you want to cast your Devourer on top of your opponents. I don't always do that. I should, I know. But in the heat of battle, sometimes with juggling all these buffs, I do forget. But you can see your Devourer, sometimes he attacks this monster, other times he attacks that monster. There's no way to control the AI at all, and there's no way to make it do what you actually want it to do. This is especially bad when you have a situation where you have these purple resistance aura monsters and you're trying to target kill them. It's gonna have you have a kind of a rough time in the higher tiers of the pit. But still, I consider this to be a monumental success, bringing up one of the most useless skills in the entire game with very poor AoE, and managed to optimize it enough so you can actually clear pit 80. So to me, that's a success. Now, can you push this even further? I think that you can, maybe 85, maybe even pit 90. If the bug that I talked about is fixed on the live version, I can see myself going to the pit 90. But in the current iteration of the build, what we've done here is a huge success. And these are the situations in which Devourer struggles the most. So we have these elites that have damage resistance auras, because you cannot exactly target individual monsters. So the Devourer, I'm trying to cast it on top of them. I'm trying to group them all together with Vortex. I'm trying to keep all the buffs active. And of course, whenever I do group monsters, I'm trying to evade just before I use the Devourer. As you can see, I have here the buff, evade buff, and that's why my Devourer deals more damage. This is basically the gameplay itself, as I already explained. 5 stacks of Ring of Starless Skies, 5 stacks of Crown of Illusion, even though you can't actually see it because the buff bar is limited. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. So once again, just grouping the monsters together, casting Devourer. It should be on top of them, so you can play even better than I'm playing, for sure. But as you can see, always applying Vulnerable with my skills, always having 5 stacks of Illusion, 5 stacks of Ring of Starless Skies, grouping them together with Vortex, and yeah, that's basically the gameplay. So yeah, visually really striking. It's definitely not your everyday Diablo 4 build. Of course, it does come with advantages and also disadvantages. To get this build to clear Pit 80 really tested the limits of my sanity, but ultimately, yeah, I'm definitely pleased with the end result. Just to fast forward a bit so you can see the boss kill as well. Bam. And there you have it, guys. A complete guide to Season 10 PTR Devourer Spiritborn. Never thought I would actually say those words, but yes, an actually viable Devourer build. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the different flavor, something new, something fresh that we haven't really seen in the game so far. And so if you appreciate these efforts, give the video a thumb up and sub to the channel, because it helps me tremendously and it keeps me going to do even more of these videos. And also, if you have an idea for a different kind of build that you might like to see from this channel, from myself, let me know, and if I like it, I just might cook up something. This is not my first foray into making an off-meta build, so I would like to thank all of you for your massive support on the new Crackling Energy Sorcerer. It's been really successful and you guys really enjoyed it, and I have as well. I will definitely be playing it in Season 10 as soon as it launches. And also, a season back, I made a completely off-meta Mighty Throw Barbarian, which also seen great success, and you guys really enjoyed that as well. This one, of course, had its own sets of challenges, in a sense that I had to do pretty much everything from scratch and had 0 frames of reference, but through trial and error, I think we got there. Hopefully, the build improves in Season 10 once the bug that I mentioned already has been fixed. And of course, as always, everything you see is going to be down below in the planner, pinned in the comment section and in the description of the video as well. Well, this is going to be it from me, guys. I hope you have a good one. My name is Fallen Messiah, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.